The galactic hegemony had been in the business of cosmic babysitting for approximately 14,000 standard cycles, which was roughly equivalent to telling a toddler not to stick their finger in an electrical socket for the same amount of time. One might assume that after such an extensive period of intergalactic childcare, they would have developed some wisdom about the nature of developing species. One would be catastrophically wrong. The administrative complex of benevolent oversight floated serenely in the regal sector, a bureaucratic monument to the delightful arrogance that only comes from wielding absolute power over species too primitive to know they're being managed. Its crystalline spires hummed with the satisfied energy of beings who had never once questioned whether their methods might be fundamentally flawed. After all, why would they? The system had worked perfectly for millennia, keeping the galaxy's more enthusiastic species from turning themselves into radioactive dust, or worse yet, becoming competition. The hegemony's approach to galactic peace was elegantly simple: identify potentially dangerous developing civilizations, wrap them in invisible protective barriers, and watch them fumble about in their little planetary sandbox until they either achieved enlightenment or conveniently wiped themselves out. It was a foolproof system, really, assuming one defined foolproof as completely dependent on the subjects never discovering they were being watched. Earth, officially designated as Protected Developing World Classification Theta 7, had been under this benevolent surveillance for the past 3 of their millennia. The planet was wrapped in a sophisticated network of cloaked monitoring stations, energy-dampening fields, and what the hegemony liked to call developmental guidance barriers, which were essentially cosmic training wheels designed to prevent the locals from accidentally discovering faster-than-light travel or, heaven forbid, developing weapons that might actually pose a threat to someone important. The humans, bless their violent little hearts, had no idea they were living in the galactic equivalent of a padded room. Senior Administrative Overseer Zix the Nor regarded the quarterly reports with the same enthusiasm most beings reserved for root canal procedures. The Terran monitoring station's data scrolled past in neat columns of bureaucratic tedium, atmospheric composition stable, technological development proceeding within acceptable parameters, military capabilities laughably primitive, nuclear arsenals contained to sub-galactic threat level. The humans were playing with fusion bombs like children with firecrackers, completely unaware that their toys wouldn't even scratch the paint on a proper warship. Still banging rocks together, I see, muttered junior analyst Vexicolor, mandibles clicking in what passed for amusement among their species. Though I must admit, their latest military exercises show a certain coordination, almost like they actually know what they're doing. Zixthanor's sensory organs rippled with dismissive humor. Coordination? They can't even agree on a single planetary government. Half their military spending goes toward threatening the other half of their own species. They're about as dangerous as a pack of territorial scavengers. This assessment, while technically accurate based on the carefully filtered data the monitoring stations provided, suffered from the same fundamental flaw that had plagued every galactic civilization since the dawn of interstellar bureaucracy: the profound inability to distinguish between appears harmless and is actually harmless. The hegemony's sensors were calibrated to detect conventional threats, energy weapons, exotic matter manipulation, faster-than-light capability. They were not, however, designed to recognize the particular brand of creative problem-solving that emerges when an entire apex predator species suddenly discovers it's been living in a cage. The quarterly budget review arrived with all the fanfare of a bureaucratic meteor strike. Funding for the Outer Rim protection programs was being temporarily reallocated to address more pressing concerns in core systems. Several hundred protected worlds would need to have their monitoring reduced to essential functions only, while the administrative complex dealt with what the reports euphemistically called resource optimization. Earth is stable, Zixthanor reasoned, reviewing the centuries of placid human development. Their technology is advancing at a predictable rate, their military capabilities are contained within acceptable parameters, and their society shows no signs of rapid unification. We can afford to reduce their protection protocols to minimal surveillance. The decision was made with the casual indifference of beings who had never encountered a species capable of turning disappointment into weapons-grade fury. The energy barriers would be powered down, the cloaking fields suspended, and the monitoring stations would switch to passive observation mode. It was a perfectly reasonable cost-cutting measure, backed by millennia of successful species management, and the kind of unshakable confidence that comes from never having been wrong about anything important. The shutdown sequence was scheduled for the following standard cycle, just enough time for the local administrators to file the appropriate paperwork and inform the monitoring stations of their new operational parameters. It was all very civilized, very efficient, and very much in keeping with the hegemony's proud tradition of managing the galaxy's younger species with wisdom, patience, and the absolute certainty that they knew what was best for everyone. After all, what could possibly go wrong with temporarily removing the protective barriers around a species that had spent the last century perfecting the art of industrialized warfare? The humans were barely capable of reaching their own moon with any reliability. They were hardly going to pose a threat to galactic civilization if left unsupervised for a few cycles. The irony of this assessment would become apparent soon enough, though by then it would be far too late to reconsider the wisdom of awakening a species that had spent 3,000 years under cosmic house arrest. Completely unaware that their every move had been watched, catalogued, and dismissed as harmlessly primitive, the hegemony was about to learn a valuable lesson about assumptions, and humanity was about to provide the education. The first sign that something had gone spectacularly wrong occurred at exactly 1437 Universal Standard Time, when every radio telescope on Earth simultaneously detected what appeared to be a small city floating in geosynchronous orbit above the Pacific Ocean. This was followed in rapid succession by the discovery of 17 more installations scattered throughout the solar system, each one broadcasting on frequencies that had previously registered as cosmic background radiation. The response from Earth's various space agencies was swift and uniform, complete, pants-wetting panic. Within 6 hours, every major government on the planet had been briefed on what military analysts were already calling the Great Unveiling, though historians would later note that the day we found out we were cosmic pets might have been more accurate. Decades of SETI research had been rendered moot in a single afternoon, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that humanity had been living under surveillance so comprehensive it made their own intelligence agencies look like amateur birdwatch. The revelation that their entire civilization had been operating under some form of alien oversight for an undisclosed period struck the collective human psyche like a tactical nuclear warhead delivered via diplomatic pouch. The initial shock, however, was quickly replaced by something far more dangerous, the kind of cold, calculating rage that only emerges when an entire species discovers it has been fundamentally deceived. Military commanders across the globe began coordinating with an efficiency that would have been impressive if it weren't so thoroughly terrifying. The same species that couldn't agree on climate change protocols or international trade agreements suddenly found perfect harmony in their shared desire to express their displeasure with their cosmic babysitters. It was, as one defense analyst later observed, humanity's first truly unified global initiative, and naturally it involved planning to kill something. The Pentagon's crisis response team had reconvened every 2 hours since the discovery, and their conclusions grew progressively more alarming with each brief. The alien installations weren't just monitoring stations. They were equipped with energy projection systems that appeared capable of interfering with human technology on a planetary scale. Satellite imagery revealed structures that had been invisible for decades, their cloaking systems now offline and revealing the extent of humanity's cosmic supervision. "They've been watching us this entire time," the Secretary of Defense observed with the kind of understated fury that typically preceded very poor decisions for everyone involved. "Every missile test, every military exercise, every classified operation. They've been sitting up there taking notes like we're some kind of academic exercise." The scientific community, meanwhile, was experiencing its own form of collective apoplexy. The alien technology represented advances in physics that were simultaneously centuries beyond human capability and, frustratingly, not quite beyond human comprehension. The energy signatures suggested manipulation of fundamental forces that human scientists had theorized but never achieved, while the construction techniques implied manufacturing capabilities that were enviable rather than incomprehensible. This distinction proved crucial, because there's a significant difference between encountering technology that might as well be magic, and encountering technology that's simply better than yours. The former inspires awe and submission, the latter inspires reverse engineering and research teams across the globe began working with the kind of focused intensity typically reserved for wartime crash programs, because as several governments had quietly acknowledged, this was effectively a wartime crash program. The alien installations had made no attempt to communicate or explain their presence, which human leadership interpreted as either profound arrogance or tactical oversight. Given humanity's recent track record with both concepts, neither interpretation was particularly welcome. The breakthrough came, predictably, from the same military-industrial complex that had spent the last century perfecting the art of turning scientific discoveries into creative methods of destruction. Within 72 hours of the initial detection, human engineers had managed to decode several alien communication protocols and identify what appeared to be standard operational procedures for the monitoring station. The intelligence gathered from these intercepts painted a picture that transformed human bewilderment into something approaching homicidal clarity. Earth was designated as a protected developing world, which was apparently cosmic bureaucrat speak for primitive species under observation. The monitoring stations had been maintaining what their operators called developmental guidance barriers, systems designed to prevent human technology from advancing beyond predetermined parameters. Every failed space mission, every experimental weapon that had mysteriously malfunctioned during tests, every breakthrough that had seemed tantalizingly close before vanishing into inexplicable technical difficulties, all of it had been the result of deliberate intervention by beings who viewed human civilization as a chemistry experiment, requiring careful supervision. The realization that humanity's greatest technological limitations had been artificially imposed by cosmic middle management triggered what psychologists would later classify as the largest collective case of wounded pride in recorded history. The species that had prided itself on its ingenuity and determination discovered that its greatest achievements had been accomplished while wearing the galactic equivalent of training wheels. This discovery coincided with reports from observatories worldwide that the alien installations were operating on reduced power and appeared to be running minimal staff. Whatever had caused the cloaking systems to fail had apparently also triggered some form of operational drawdown, leaving the monitoring stations vulnerable in ways that human military planners found deeply encouraging. The response was both predictable and unprecedented. For the first time in recorded history, every major military power on Earth began sharing intelligence and coordinating operational planning with complete transparency. Ancient enemies found themselves working side by side, united by the understanding that their cosmic babysitters had finally made the mistake of revealing themselves while being insufficiently prepared for the consequences. Humanity had spent millennia perfecting the art of warfare against its own species. Now, with typical human adaptability, they began the process of scaling up their expertise to address an entirely new category of target. The beings who had dismissed them as harmlessly primitive were about to discover what happened when apex predators realized they had been living in captivity. The age of human innocence was over, and the age of human vengeance was about to begin. The attack began at precisely 0000's Universal Coordinated Time on what would later be remembered as humanity's Independence Day. Though the irony of celebrating freedom by systematically hunting down cosmic bureaucrats was lost on absolutely no one involved in the plan. 18 monitoring stations throughout the solar system discovered simultaneously that their former test subjects had developed some rather pointed opinions about unauthorized surveillance. The coordinated strike was executed with the kind of ruthless precision that only comes from a species that has spent centuries perfecting the art of killing things that annoy them, scaled up to address targets that had been particularly annoying for several millennia. The station orbiting Earth died first, which was fitting given that its operators had spent the longest time filing reports about humanity's charmingly primitive military capability. The assault came from 17 different vectors simultaneously. Kinetic projectiles launched from lunar installations that weren't supposed to exist, directed energy weapons fired from satellites that had been disguised as communications equipment, and what appeared to be weaponized space debris moving with suspicious coordination and entirely too much velocity. The alien administrators aboard the monitoring platform had approximately 47 seconds to contemplate the philosophical implications of being attacked by a species they had classified as technologically adorable, before their station's hull integrity became a purely academic concern. Similar scenes played out across the solar system, with the mechanical efficiency of an industrial process. Mars orbital platforms, asteroid belt observation posts, and deep space monitoring arrays all discovered that humanity had been remarkably busy during their period of supposed technological limitation. The defensive systems that had been designed to protect against threats from other galactic civilizations proved embarrassingly inadequate against enemies who had learned warfare by practicing on each other for thousands of years. The human approach to the problem was characteristically direct. If something was watching them without permission, it needed to stop existing as quickly and violently as possible. The fact that their targets were representatives of a galactic government that could theoretically glass their entire planet was treated as a tactical consideration rather than a deterrent, which said everything necessary about humanity's approach to risk assessment. Within 6 hours, every alien presence in the solar system had been reduced to expanding clouds of superheated plasma and debris. The monitoring network that had observed human development for 3 millennia was comprehensively dismantled by the subjects of that observation, using weapons that had theoretically been impossible for them to develop. This achievement was made possible by what military historians would later recognize as humanity's greatest strategic advantage: their profound inability to accept that anything was genuinely impossible if sufficient violence could be applied to the problem. The energy-dampening fields that had prevented human technology from advancing past predetermined limitations had been circumvented through the simple expedient of building systems that operated on principles the dampening fields hadn't been programmed to recognize. The aliens had prevented humanity from developing conventional faster-than-light drives, so human engineers had created transportation systems based on controlled spatial distortion. They had blocked advances in directed energy weapons, so human military researchers had built kinetic systems that achieved similar destructive effects through creative applications of relativistic physics. Every barrier had been bypassed, every limitation circumvented, every technological ceiling shattered through the application of weaponized spite and an engineering philosophy that treated impossible as a personal insult. The aftermath of the attacks revealed capabilities that should have taken humanity centuries to develop, deployed with tactical sophistication that suggested extensive preparation. Hidden manufacturing facilities on the lunar surface had been producing war materials for decades. Asteroid mining operations had been supplying raw materials for weapons programs that officially didn't exist. Deep space installations had been conducting research into technologies that human governments publicly claimed were purely theoretical. The revelation that humanity had been secretly preparing for interstellar warfare while publicly struggling with climate change and resource management struck many observers as typically human in its contradictory absurdity. The same species that couldn't coordinate a unified response to planetary environmental degradation had somehow managed to coordinate a solar system-wide military buildup without their cosmic supervisors noticing. The first official communication from Earth to the broader galaxy was transmitted 12 hours after the last monitoring station went silent. The message was broadcast on every frequency the aliens had been using, ensuring that every member of the galactic hegemony would receive humanity's introduction to interstellar diplomacy. The transmission was brief, direct, and delivered with the kind of casual politeness that made its content particularly unsettling. To whom it may concern, we have recently discovered that our solar system has been under unauthorized surveillance by representatives of your organization. This surveillance has been terminated. Any attempt to re-establish monitoring operations will be considered an act of war. We look forward to discussing the terms of our future relationship at your earliest convenience. Please note that this discussion will take place on our terms, at locations of our choosing, with negotiators of our selection. We trust this arrangement will prove mutually beneficial. The message concluded with comprehensive technical specifications for the weapons systems that had destroyed the monitoring network, apparently as a courtesy to help the recipients understand the new tactical reality they were facing. It was the galactic equivalent of introducing oneself to the neighborhood by burning down the local police station, and then providing detailed blueprints of the explosives used. The response from the galactic hegemony was predictably bureaucratic: emergency sessions, crisis committees, and urgent consultations with military advisors who had spent their careers preparing for threats that were nothing like the one they now faced. The protected species that had been classified as developmentally harmless had apparently used their protection period to develop into something that made their cosmic supervisors profoundly nervous. Humanity had graduated from cosmic daycare to interstellar threat in less than a week, and they had celebrated this achievement by systematically murdering their former babysitters. The beings who had spent millennia managing galactic peace through careful oversight of developing species were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth: sometimes the children grow up to be more dangerous than their parents ever imagined. The solar system was now effectively a fortress, defended by a species that had demonstrated both the capability and the enthusiasm
for turning cosmic surveillance into cosmic funeral pyres. The age of human protection was over, and the age of human expansion was about to begin. The transformation of Earth from a protected wildlife preserve into the galaxy's newest military superpower took exactly 72 hours, which was either a testament to human efficiency or a damning indictment of galactic intelligence gathering. Possibly both, given that the hegemony's threat assessment protocols had apparently failed to account for the possibility that a species might respond to cosmic babysitting with systematic genocide. The administrative complex of benevolent oversight was experiencing what could charitably be called a complete organizational breakdown, though bureaucratic panic attack might have been more accurate. Emergency sessions had been convened with such frequency that several administrators had developed stress-related molting conditions, while others had retreated into hibernation pods rather than deal with the mounting crisis report. Senior administrative overseers, Zixensor, stared at the tactical displays with the expression of someone watching their carefully ordered universe collapse into chaos, which was precisely what was happening. The humans had not only destroyed every monitoring station in their solar system, but had somehow managed to do so using technology that shouldn't have existed for another millennia. The species they had dismissed as charmingly primitive had apparently been using their protection period to develop weapons specifically designed to kill their protectors. Their fortifying, reported junior analyst Vexicular mandibles clicking with nervous energy. Deep space sensor arrays, orbital defense platforms, something that looks like a planetary shield generator. They've turned their entire system into a military installation. The irony was not lost on the administrative staff that their former test subjects were now better defended than most core hegemony world. Earth had become a fortress manned by apex predators, who had spent 3,000 years perfecting the art of violence, while their cosmic supervisors had grown soft, managing a peaceful galaxy. More disturbing than humanity's military capabilities, however, was their apparent understanding of galactic politics. The destroyed monitoring stations had contained complete databases of hegemony operations, including detailed information about every other protected world in the galaxy. The humans now possessed a comprehensive guide to galactic civilization's most vulnerable points, and they had demonstrated both the inclination and capability to exploit such information. The second wave of humanity's diplomatic outreach began 48 hours after their initial message, though diplomatic was perhaps an overly generous description of what amounted to a recruitment campaign for interstellar rebellion. Transmissions began appearing on protected worlds throughout the galaxy, broadcast in local languages, and accompanied by technical specifications for jamming hegemony monitoring equipment. The messages were masterpieces of psychological warfare, combining genuine concern for cosmic justice with practical instructions for overthrowing galactic authority. They began with expressions of solidarity between oppressed species, and concluded with detailed blueprints for weapons capable of destroying orbital surveillance platforms. It was revolution disguised as humanitarian aid, delivered with the kind of aggressive helpfulness that made recipients simultaneously grateful and terrified. The response was immediate and catastrophic for galactic stability. Protected worlds that had spent centuries developing under careful supervision suddenly found themselves capable of detecting and destroying their cosmic babysitters. Species that had been classified as developmentally stable began coordinating attacks on monitoring stations with efficiency that suggested extensive preparation. The Andorian Collective, whose protection status had been renewed only the previous cycle, successfully eliminated their surveillance network within 18 hours of receiving human technical assistance. The Corvan Empire, previously noted for their refreshing lack of military ambition, deployed previously unknown weapons systems against their monitoring stations, and transmitted a formal declaration of independence to the administrative complex. Within a standard week, 17 protected worlds had achieved what bureaucrats were euphemistically calling unscheduled graduation from oversight status, though successful rebellion against cosmic authority would have been more accurate. The carefully maintained galactic peace was dissolving into chaos as species after species discovered that their technological limitations had been artificially imposed, and their development had been deliberately stunted. The humans, meanwhile, had established themselves as the unofficial coordinators of galactic revolution, providing technical assistance, tactical advice, and moral support to any species interested in expressing their displeasure with hegemony management. Their solar system had become a beacon of successful resistance, broadcasting instructions for overthrowing cosmic authority with the enthusiasm of beings who had discovered their true calling. The administrative complex's attempts to restore order were met with responses that ranged from polite refusal to violent rejection, depending on the species involved. The protection protocols that had maintained galactic stability for millennia were revealed as fundamentally dependent on the subjects remaining unaware of their situation. Once that ignorance was shattered, the entire system collapsed with spectacular thoroughness. Emergency military consultations revealed the scope of the crisis facing galactic civilization. The hegemony's military forces had been designed to maintain peace between established civilizations, not to wage war against species they had spent centuries helping to develop. Their weapons were sophisticated but limited in number. Their tactics were optimized for diplomatic enforcement rather than total warfare, and their personnel had no experience fighting enemies who treated galactic law as a personal insult. The humans, by contrast, had spent their protection period developing military capabilities specifically optimized for killing things that annoyed them, and they were apparently very annoyed indeed. Their weapons were primitive, by galactic standards, but produced in quantities that suggested industrial warfare capabilities. Their tactics were brutal but effective, and their personnel demonstrated the kind of enthusiasm for violence that made seasoned military observers profoundly uncomfortable. The final irony emerged as the administrative complex struggled to contain the spreading rebellion. The protection system, that had been designed to prevent dangerous species from threatening galactic civilization, had instead created the conditions for the most comprehensive threat to galactic civilization in recorded history. By keeping potentially dangerous species isolated and technologically limited, the hegemony had prevented them from integrating peacefully into galactic society, while simultaneously giving them every reason to view that society as an enemy. The humans had become what the protection system was designed to prevent, a unified, technologically advanced, militarily capable species with both the means and motivation to challenge galactic authority. Worse, they had become teachers, sharing their knowledge of rebellion with every other species that had been subjected to cosmic supervision. The galaxy's age of peaceful oversight was ending, replaced by an era of interstellar warfare between former supervisors and their liberated subjects. The administrative complex of benevolent oversight found itself administrating the collapse of the very system it had been created to maintain. While the beings who had once filed reports about humanity's charmingly primitive nature were learning that some forms of charm were more dangerous than others.
The protection had been lifted, the subjects had graduated, and their first lesson in galactic citizenship was teaching everyone else how to overthrow their cosmic babysitters. The hegemony had succeeded in creating exactly the kind of galactic civilization they had sought to prevent, and humanity was leading the curriculum in advanced revolutionary warfare. The universe, it seemed, had developed a sense of irony.